According to the National Association of Manufacturers in the United States, there are nearly 300,000 restrictions placed on American manufacturing, restrictions that form part of the regulations laid out in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. Now, these restrictions impact virtually every area within manufacturing, and while many are necessary for the safety and welfare of Americans in general, a lot of manufacturers will tell you that others simply get in the way of doing business. There are also rules that fall under the heading of voluntary regulations, such as ISO standards, for example. But even here, it's difficult for a manufacturer to operate without compliance. Welcome to episode 5 of Ahead of the Curve, a podcast dealing with the impact of technology on manufacturing, and produced by Gerent, one of the top Salesforce consulting and implementation companies in the world. I'm Chris Henry. In this episode, we're going to be tackling a subject that has been and probably will continue to be the greatest concern to manufacturers: regulations and compliance. But we're coming at it from the point of view of how an enterprise quality management solution, an EQMS, can ensure that a manufacturer stays compliant at all times. Now, it's not our intention to argue the pros and cons of these regulations, but instead to focus on how manufacturers can best deal with them through quality management systems driven by modern software technology. Given the hundreds of thousands of rules that manufacturers must follow, it makes sense to have a QMS in place that helps them remain compliant. Not being compliant is simply not an option. Our guests today include Paul Sanderson, Manager of Solutions Engineering at Compliance Quest, a company that provides enterprise QMS technology on the Salesforce platform, and Chaitanya Sonarakar, Gerent's VP of Manufacturing Services, and someone with decades of global manufacturing experience. So let's begin with compliance. It could be argued that there's an increasing emphasis on compliance in manufacturing today. That's something that Paul Sanderson sees with the clients that he deals with.
There certainly seems to be. There's more interest in the type of software that we sell, which really does help with compliance. And that's usually a central theme of clients that we talk to, or potential clients, is they're looking to be compliant with often a standard, usually the ISO standards or something like the ISO standards. That could be because it's just kind of become an expected thing. If you want to do business with, well, pretty much anyone, a Walmart, for example, they often will require that you be certified to a particular standard. And then there's, of course, just the things that have happened over the years with consumers being harmed in some way. There's new regulations that have come out in the last 10 years for food and, things that can be a safety hazard, a potential safety hazard, that have increased the governmental regulations as well. So there does seem to be an increased focus on compliance.
So are these ever-increasing and shifting regulations the driving force behind EQMS technology?
The regulations, and even if you consider, whether they're laws, governmental regulations, or more, quote, voluntary regulations like an ISO standard, those have really been one of the key drivers for the QMS systems on the market. They are pretty prescriptive as to what you need to do from, a process standpoint and a documentation standpoint. So they're called EQMS systems, but they're often referred to also as quality and compliance systems, because those two things, quality and compliance, really tend to go hand in hand.
Elaborate on that. What is the link between quality and compliance?
Well, the purpose of compliance, you're complying with standards and regulations that are intended to make your product or service higher quality or safer, which, of course, if something's not safe, you would have a hard time arguing that it was high quality. So they really go hand in hand. They're intended to be almost one and the same, that the output of compliance would be not only compliance, but also quality. That's not necessarily always the case, but that is certainly the intent behind it. And if implemented correctly, and if an organization is looking at not just compliance, but seeing how compliance to a lot of these standards and regulations will help their product quality, then they do tend to go hand in hand. If you are compliant, you also have high quality. And a lot would also say that if you focused on really high quality, the natural output of that would be you would be compliant. So it can go both ways.
So there is a link between compliance and quality. And what governs quality is conformance to a process. Chaitanya Sonarakar, the VP of Manufacturing Services at Gerent, explains how an EQMS helps manufacturers achieve conformance.
The product quality depends on the conformance and compliance to a process, especially in manufacturing environments. The individuals who will be performing such process or procedures needs to be trained. They also needs to be audited in order to ensure that from time to time, compliance to the processes is understood, at the same time is monitored. The EQMS system allows such audit management and keeping the records of what exactly are the issues of non-compliance, how a corrective action and a preventive action is taken, and all the documentation regarding to that. This is also required for all the manufacturers as they are bound by an ISO standards, which requires that all such information is documented. This is where EQMS plays a very important role.
The EQMS solution that Compliance Quest offers is built on the Salesforce platform, and it's a far cry from traditional QMS methodologies that employ spreadsheets and are forced to use a lot of manual input. And EQMS literally makes compliance and conformance automatic, as Paul Sanderson explains.
There are still a lot of companies using spreadsheets, but really what a Compliance Quest system would do is take the data that is in that spreadsheet and get it into a centralized database, number one, and now in a database that's in the cloud. So it's available at any time from anywhere. So, of course, really difficult to make that spreadsheet available to everyone everywhere. So that's number one at the most base level. But those spreadsheets also represent the output of a lot of processes. For example, if you receive material, for example, from a supplier and you inspect it and it doesn't meet your specification, you are required to write what's usually referred to as a non-conformance. That non-conformance gathers a lot of data. What product was it? What was the defect? Who was the supplier? The descriptions, lots of data relevant to the non-conformance. And then also, what did you do to correct the problem? Where is the record? And if you're using a spreadsheet, you might also be using a piece of paper for the record or a document that gets just routed around through email. Those spreadsheets represent all that data that's been collected for your ability to be able to do analytics on that data for management purposes, as well as track the processes. So when you put it in an EQMS, those processes become completely automated. So you're logging that non-conformance record, and it's in the cloud in a centralized system that everyone can access. So you know where it's at, who you're waiting on, and that data is automatically in a database so that you can report on it. That spreadsheet, to kind of sum it up, just represents the output, a lot of processes that have to be tracked. You have to keep track of those records. And when you do it electronically in a system like CQ, you're doing it seamlessly. As you fill out that non-conformance record, it is being entered into the database or what would have been the spreadsheet. They're all tied together and accessible from anywhere. And then that data, of course, is able to be tracked and trended, which is really important to the QMS.
We've all read and seen the stories of how computer hackers have stolen consumer information from retailers and even credit card companies. We've also seen how the major social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and others have been vulnerable or culpable as well. Data protection has become the motherhood issue of the internet age, and it's no different for manufacturers. But here's where EQMS technology plays a critical role in helping manufacturers protect their data. Here's Chaitanya Sonarakar.
In today's competitive world, most of these manufacturers have some critical categories of data that needs a protection. Some of those are manufacturing process documentations, engineering data, the customer data, and financial data. Some of the other ones are also the employee data, but the employee data is regulated through a privacy laws such as GDPR in European Union and a mosaic of different state and federal rules in United States. The EQMS primarily deals with the other requirements or other data, which is manufacturing process documentation, engineering, customer informations, and financial data. This data protection is in a computer world, it's subjected to hacking and also the data corruptions. When you see this kind of incidences happening, there are a lot of competitive data which gets lost. At the same time, the digital media is significantly subjected when the traditional computer systems, which are on-premise kind of systems, remain unprotected. This is where the EQMS provided from Compliance Quest helps a significant leap in it. It is a cloud-based system and it is an enterprise-ready solution. This is where I think the CQ EQMS really plays an important role.
Paul Sanderson at Compliance Quest agrees completely on how critical data protection is. And he underscores how much more robust his company's EQMS is versus old systems when it comes to data protection.
It really is. And it really always has been. What's changed is, in the past, in order to maintain security, organizations felt like they had to lock everything down behind their firewall and make it very difficult to even get onto the network. So it made it, at times, virtually impossible to work from anywhere but your office. And then with cloud technology, security was obviously paramount because we're now saying, let's take those systems outside the firewall and make them available from anywhere at any time. Yeah, security is absolutely critical when it comes to a cloud system, a cloud platform. And so one of the reasons, we looked at and decided on the Salesforce, for example, is because they have hundreds of thousands of customers and have been proven over the years to be a highly secure system. So rather than trying to do that ourselves, we leverage the expertise of a very large and stable company that's been proven so that we can focus on what we're best at.
Manufacturers, of course, don't operate in isolation. They're closely linked to their suppliers through their supply chains. If a supplier isn't compliant for whatever reason, it can have a negative impact on a manufacturer, regardless of whether the manufacturer has taken internal measures to remain compliant. Sanderson explains that when an EQMS is fully integrated, it acts on the entire supply chain in a proactive manner.
So it's really a big part of it anyway, is the interaction between what's typically an ERP system, an enterprise resource planning system, which is where, your purchasing is going to be done and the management of your materials. So usually the supplier relationship, as far as systems go, begins with the ERP. Unless you have a strict process for doing the assessments of your suppliers, you may do those initial assessments to make sure that they're qualified to be your supplier in a QMS like CQ. So it kind of begins there. There's often integrations between the ERP and the QMS. In the case of CQ, we have a partnership with a system called Rootstock, where when they receive material in and need to have it inspected, it will be pushed over to CQ for inspection, and then we can feed information back to indicate that passed inspection, that material is ready to be used. And if it fails, then it would go through that nonconformance process I talked about earlier, where we make sure that we investigate what the problem was and determine the disposition. The other aspect is there is a concept of an approved supplier list that's typically maintained by quality. So they need to have a list of all the approved suppliers and the pertinent records related to those suppliers that are quality related. So things like ISO certifications, quality agreements, and then any supplier corrective actions that have been logged, any nonconformances. So we help with that, where one supplier record has access or contains all of those other quality records related to that supplier. And then on top of that, there's the ability that's kind of a combination between CQ and Salesforce, where CQ has a community portal that would allow for those suppliers that you want to be able to come into a portal and interact in real time with, say, a corrective action that you've assigned them to. They could come in and complete those corrective actions or access documents, do some of those interactions that are often taking place in email and are very difficult to track and control. We really just kind of make and are making more and more the ability to interact with suppliers completely electronic so that it's far more controlled.
An enterprise quality management solution may sound like a product designed to assist only enterprise-level companies, large manufacturers with hundreds of employees. Does that mean Compliance Quest's EQMS wouldn't work for small companies?
No, the great thing about Compliance Quest and kind of our model is it can scale from the smallest companies, a 10-employee company, for example, which we do have, to thousands of users, tens of thousands of users. And the reason we can scale so easily is because of the platform. And then the application on top of that platform can be configured to support the needs of the smallest company up to the very largest. We actually do have examples of that, but that is how the system was architected and designed to be able to handle the small companies as well as the larger ones.
And again, that speaks to the flexibility of the Salesforce platform, doesn't it?
Right, absolutely. I mean, it's, we've been talking about security and scalability with the platform, but it also offers incredible tools for developing applications and configuring things the way you want them configured. We've used the tools of the Salesforce platform to develop our entire application. That capability really makes it so we can serve the small client as well as the large.
Let's talk about the business proposition here. How does EQMS stack up in terms of return on investment for a manufacturer?
It depends on whether you're wanting to look at the direct cost savings. So there's a direct cost savings, which is usually what is being looked at when a QMS is being purchased. But when you really start looking at a properly managed QMS system and the efficiencies that can be gained and the higher quality that can be gained. So one thing that often happens is product is able to get out to the sales team quicker because we're not trying to chase down quality paperwork before we release a lot, for example, or we need to make a change. And so a change order has to go through a process of getting all the sign-offs by the appropriate subject matter experts to make sure that change is okay. Well, oftentimes that's done through email or on paper, and it can literally take months if you're a global organization. You can either save money, and one of the big things that we're typically looking at is the saving of just efficiency and manpower in just managing the QMS. That's a definite place that you save money. But the other place that's secondary and is harder to measure are, what does a good QMS do for you from even a marketing standpoint? Is it increasing your quality? Is it getting your product out faster? All of those sorts of things. And if compliance is a big deal, is it keeping you compliant? Because being out of compliance could lose you a customer, a big customer. Or if you're regulated, it could cost you fines or even cause you to shut down production for a while to get things in order.
Once a manufacturer has decided to move forward with the Compliance Quest EQMS technology, the next step is deciding on an implementation partner to use. Compliance Quest announced in the summer of 2019 that it had chosen Gerent to be its Salesforce consultation and implementation partner. According to Chaitanya Sanarakar, Gerent's VP of Manufacturing Services, it was because of Gerent's levels of expertise and talent in customizing solutions using Salesforce technology.
One of the important things that every company needs to look for is to have a partner which has a significant experience, at the same time has a way of getting the things done in a complex situations. So Gerent has a vast experience in implementation of the technology solutions, either in the discrete or in the process manufacturing. Also, Gerent has an innovative approach towards implementation of the custom developments in a really complex situations. Also, Gerent has a strong team which has and experience on a Salesforce platform for consulting, implementation, doing the configurations, and also the integrations. These are the real advantages which Compliance Quest identifies in Gerent and certainly values them for being a partner.
Running a Salesforce-based EQMS like that from Compliance Quest means a manufacturer is employing the world's #1 customer technology platform. When it's configured by Compliance Quest, it provides a full 360-degree view of the compliance and conformance landscape within an organization, updating, alerting, and recommending appropriate action when and where necessary. And that should make short work of the thousands of different regulations, laws, restrictions, and standards that manufacturers face every day. You've been listening to Ahead of the Curve, produced by Gerent in cooperation with Salesforce. Our technical producer is Dave Grine from the Acme Podcasting Company in Toronto. And I'm Chris Henry. Thanks for joining us.